Hello, welcome to AP Sources Simplified. Today we are looking at the Roosevelt Corollary. This foreign policy statement was written and delivered to Congress in 1904 by Theodore Roosevelt. Before getting into the document, let's take a look at the context. The Monroe Doctrine was issued by President James Monroe in 1824, and it warned other European powers to stop interfering with Latin America and the Caribbean, because those regions were the U.S. sphere of influence. Although the United States had no military means of enforcing the Monroe Doctrine at the time, this document would play a major role at the turn of the 20th century in regards to the U.S. foreign policy. In the 19th century, European powers were engaged in the race for Africa, as various nations rushed to colonize Africa and other islands, so these colonies could help provide valuable resources such as metals, gemstones, and timber. The United States had been inward-looking for most of the 19th century as it looked to develop its economy. By the late 1800s, the United States had developed into a major economic power. It now had the ability to turn its economic might into military might and project power on the world stage. As a result, in the United States, there was a surge of jingoism, which is extreme patriotism, especially in the form of aggressive or warlike foreign policy. Some jingos, like Theodore Roosevelt, wished to annex or obtain territories to protect national interests, often economic, and to become a colonial empire like Great Britain and France. There was also an idea called the white man's burden, which went along with the ideology of social Darwinism, in that the majority white Anglo-Saxon countries, like the United States and Great Britain, had a duty to, quote, civilize the rest of the world. In the Spanish-American War and the subsequent Treaty of Paris in 1898, the U.S. acquired the territories of Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines from Spain. In 1899, the U.S. also annexed Hawaii. In the early 20th century, the U.S. pursued an open-door policy in China and East Asia, which provided opportunities for American businesses. These new acquisitions also served as military outposts for the U.S., such as the establishment of Guantanamo Bay in Cuba through the Platt Amendment in 1901, which also made it so the U.S. had considerable influence over Cuba. After the assassination of McKinley, who was lukewarm on an aggressive foreign policy, jingoism would surge, with Theodore Roosevelt taking office, and was also fueled by economic and military opportunities. In 1902 and 1903, an international crisis sprung up in Venezuela, as the president of Venezuela refused to repay loans to several European powers, who then blockaded Venezuelan ports. The U.S. intervened and got all sides to work out an agreement and abide by an international court decision. However, Roosevelt was worried this would embolden other European powers to physically intervene in Latin American affairs. This culminated in the Roosevelt Corollary, which was established by Theodore Roosevelt in 1904 during his annual message to Congress. In his message to Congress, Theodore Roosevelt referenced the Monroe Doctrine and its warning to European countries to stay out of the Americas and the Caribbean, and not interfere with their affairs. Roosevelt added to the Monroe Doctrine, saying that the United States would act as an international force and would step in to stop European powers, even in cases that did not involve European powers grabbing land in Latin America. And finally, the U.S. may involve itself in Latin American affairs directly to prevent, quote, chronic wrongdoing, and to ensure the financial solvency of Latin American countries. Theodore Roosevelt was a jingo, and he supported U.S. expansion to other territories outside the mainland U.S. Although this speech was originally written to be spoken to Congress, it was also a message to the rest of the world that the U.S. was willing to intervene in other countries in the Americas and would prevent other European powers from interfering with those countries. It was also informing Latin American powers that the U.S. was reserving the right to intervene in their affairs. Many other Republicans would agree with this source. One such example was Teddy Roosevelt's successor, William Taft. Taft used the Roosevelt Corollary as justification for intervening in the economies of many other Central American countries. This practice became known as dollar diplomacy, and dollar diplomacy was often used to protect the United States' economic interests. Many other jingos and jingoism supporters would also agree with this source, as it represented the potential to bring more territories under the umbrella of U.S. control, whether that be militarily, economically, or politically. Many Democrats would disagree with this source and would argue that it goes too far, and that the U.S. has no right to interfere with the affairs of other countries. Many progressives, such as William Jennings Bryan, would also disagree with the source, as they believe that the Roosevelt Corollary was too imperialistic. Immediately and in the following decades, the Roosevelt Corollary will attempt to justify countless interventions in by the U.S. in Latin American affairs, such as the Panama Canal and the establishment of Guantanamo Bay. The Roosevelt Corollary isn't an addition or revision to the Monroe Doctrine, and is sometimes called the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Well, thanks for watching the video. If you liked the video, click that like button, share with your friends, and subscribe for more videos.